At the end of the previous video, Husserl maintained that the mind could determine the essential features of the world by attending to its own phenomenology, that is, the appearance of things in conscious experience. I suggested you spend some time paying attention to your own consciousness to see if you found this view plausible. One philosopher who was not convinced was Gottlob Frege. A contemporary of Husserl, Frege was also a logician and a mathematician. As such, he thought there was an important difference between psychological laws, which are a description of how people do think, and logical laws, which are a prescription for how people should think. Remember the fourth condition for a theory of representation: misrepresentation. There needs to be a way to say what counts as a mistaken representation of a particular thing. For example, I glance over my shoulder and I think, oh, there's my football, but it's really my brain. Why is this a misrepresentation of the brain rather than a correct representation of the football? A theory needs to account for the distinction between how things are, which are truths governed by logic, and how we think of them, which are concepts governed by psychology. Frege argued that phenomenology blurred the distinction between psychology and logic, and accused Husserl of psychologism, which is where psychological laws determine logical laws. Husserl offered various responses to this sort of challenge, and you might try to think of ways that a phenomenologist could respond to the charge of psychologism and separate logic and psychology, if you like that view. But Frege wanted a clear separation between logic and psychology in order to establish a firm foundation for truth and justification, which is something that philosophers are big on. This argument marks a key dividing point in the early 20th century between analytic and continental schools of philosophy, where analytic philosophers sought to determine truth and reality independent of the mind, and continental philosophers maintained a focus on mind and consciousness as the source of knowledge and existence. Frege's suggestion for getting logic outside the head was a strange entity he called thought. And you might be wondering how thought could be mind independent, since thinking tends to be thought of as a paradigmatically mind dependent sort of process. Like I said, it's a strange entity. And let me try to make it a little less counterintuitive by introducing a concept from philosophy of language that has similar sort of features to Frege's idea of a thought. And that's a proposition. A proposition is the content of a sentence and the bearer of truth and falsity. In the sentence, "The snow is white," the content is the color describing fluffy frozen water. And in the two sentences, "Snow is white" and "Schnee ist weiß," both of those sentences express the same proposition. That is, they're saying the same sort of thing about the same stuff. They're ascribing this color to this frozen fluffy white stuff. Frege wanted thought to do the same sort of work as a proposition. Here are some features of a thought, according to Frege, and you can look for these on page 36 of the article. First, truth and falsity applies to thoughts. And this is the key feature of a thought for Frege. It directly relates the thought to the object that the thought is about. In another article, Frege explains the relation using a telescope analogy. The referent is the object in the world, like the stars and planets, and the thought is the telescope that points to the object. The lens of the telescope bears the image of the reference. So you've got this telescope and you've got the lens, and the lens is reflecting this object that the telescope is picking out, the star or the planet or whatever that it's aimed at. The second feature of thoughts is that the meaning or the sense of the sentence is characterized by the thought. A sentence expresses the thought. So, "Snow is white" expresses the thought about the color of the cold stuff in winter. The third feature is that it's imperceptible. Thoughts are imperceptible unless, quote, clothed in the garb of a thought. A sentence allows the mind to grasp the thought, right? So you see the sentence, and then that gives you gives the mind the content of the thought that the thought is about, the snow that's white. And this is where the Fregean system gets a little mystical. If thoughts are mind independent, they're not dependent on my mind, but yet they're imperceptible, then what exactly are they? Where are they? Philosophers talk about Fregean heaven, where thoughts reside, which is similar to Platonic heaven, where the forms are. That this is a kind of ideal world that's not housed in any individual person, but it's a kind of abstraction that applies to thoughts. Both Fregean thoughts and Platonic forms are motivated by a similar concern to establish an objective determination of truth. So you've got this absolute, objective truth and reality in both Fregean thoughts and in Platonic forms. And finally, sense perception is not either true or false. So sense perception isn't a thought, but it's intimately connected to thought. And I'll say more about this a little bit later. So those are the features of thought, and various differences in language, such as style and mood, don't affect thoughts because thoughts are directly connected to truth and falsity, to the objects that they're referring to. So you could say snow is white very angrily, or kind of even doubtful, snow is white. Like, I may not know that snow is white, but the truth of that thought is true whether or not I am sad about it or happy about it or angry about it. The connection is between the content and the objects that's referred to, and so it's like mathematics in that different thought contents can be plugged into different sentences, like a formula in mathematics to spit out correct or incorrect answers. So you might have the sentence "snow is yellow," which is occasionally true. Hopefully, "snow is red" is not true. And so forth. In this way, then, Frege helped formalize the unruly nature of mind and language so that it could be suitable to symbolic logic. And that's a good thing. Symbolic logic is an extremely useful structure of thought. So what about psychology? Sadly, most people don't think according to the laws of logic. Minds get muddled in various ways. One of the big problems for Frege is known as informative identity. An item can be known in different sorts of ways. So, for example, Venus is the first star seen in the morning and is also the first star that you see in the evening. And you might fail to recognize that these are the same stars. Both map onto Venus. The morning star refers to Venus, right? So you've got that direct Fregean connection between the content Venus and the content morning star. And you've got the same mapping from the evening star to Venus. So what's the problem? What is preventing people from understanding that the morning star is the evening star? To get at this problem of psychology and to solve some other problems that were created by Fregean thoughts, Frege introduced the idea of ideas. And an idea is the grasp of a thought by the mind. It's an occurrence in an inner world, it's a sensation or feeling, and this is where we get the connection between sensations, perceptions, and thoughts. And you can look at pages 42 to 44 for a discussion of ideas. And these features, which are, first, ideas cannot be perceived, but for different reasons than thoughts. Thoughts cannot be perceived because they're mind independent items, whereas ideas are mind dependent. And we know where ideas reside. They're in the mind. That's the second feature. They belong to the content of an individual consciousness. Ideas are in people's minds. And then the third feature is that they're owner dependent. An idea must be in someone's mind. You don't have ideas floating free in Phrygian heaven with thoughts. Ideas are exclusive to the mind that has them when the mind has them. And then fourth, they're essentially private. An idea cannot be shared. I can't compare my idea of red with another idea of red because there's no medium of comparison. My idea of red is in my head, your idea of red is in your head, and we can't compare them. We can compare the content of red because red maps onto red things. That's objective. But my idea of red is mine alone. Going back to the telescope analogy, we have the reference, which are the stars and planets. We have the telescope and its lens, which is the thought that refers to the thoughts and planets. Both of those are objective, shareable items. And then we have the astronomer, and the astronomer has the ideas about the planets as seen through the lens of the telescope. In this way, Frege tried to have it both ways. He preserves the Cartesian intuition that thought determines reference. The direction of the representational arrow is from the thought to the object that the thought is about. And he prevents psychologism by taking thoughts out of the individual minds and making their content, their meaning, shared among all the minds that grasp the thought with our individual ideas. The drawback is this weird realm of thoughts that does not exist in minds or in the world. What exactly are thoughts? And more to the point of this series, what determines their content? How do thoughts come to refer to one object rather than another? Where does the thought football come from? And how is it different from the thought brain? How does one thought come to refer to this and another to refer to this? Is the sentence, "the football is green," true or false? And does it matter if I'm looking at the brain when I express the sentence, "the football is green"? Does that affect the truth? It seems like it can't, according to Frege, that the content of the sentence has to refer directly to this. But then, how is the mind involved? These are problems. There are ways to answer these questions. In particular, David Chalmers has found it useful to distinguish between meanings that are established by physical relations, such as the light reflectance frequencies of the football, and meanings established by ideas, such as the greenness in my conscious experience when I look at the football. And these are sometimes called qualia. The question of whether the contents of consciousness can be explained in terms of representation is one of the most heated debates in consciousness theory. If you're interested in my argument that representation can answer these questions, then look for the summary, the videos summarizing my book, Evolution of Consciousness, and those videos are in my consciousness playlist. Meanwhile, keep thinking about your mind. What is it to have a mind? What does your mind do? Is it a representational system? Are all the contents of your mind about something? If not, try to think of what contents of your mind seem not to be representational. If so, what determines what you're representing? How does the thought or perception of the football come to be about the football?